بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم إن الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله السلام عليكم ورحمة الله إخوان Alhamdulillah. Okay, this is session 2, so let's summarize what we did last week. Who remembers? Bismillah. Those who were here.
So last week we spoke about the reasons or the why we love Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, why the topic is important,
Yes,
the way of
perfect.
love, the course or the topic, why is it's important, and we spoke about why it's important. We had few reasons for that.
Good. So in summary, the first section of last week, a few days ago actually, we spoke about why the topic of why Allah deserves worship is important, and we talked about the idea of self-actualization, that it's fitri, it's based on our innate nature. We spoke about that it's the prophetic call, it's our purpose in life, it's our raison d'etre, it's our reason for being. It facilitates guidance, it's a timeless absolute truth. In other words, La ilaha illallah is a timeless absolute truth. It facilitates Jannah, paradise. It gives us meaningful happiness. And as Imran Hussein said, that it's something that we should focus on in the dawah, because sometimes we over-intellectualize and over-philosophize and we forget the kind of essential aspects of what we're really calling to. So, okay, good. So we covered why this topic is important. After that, what did we do? Someone knew. What did we cover?
We discussed ikhlas.
We did, yeah, briefly. But in what context?
Context of what is worship?
Good,
what
excellent.
Worship,
yeah, I think we connected it to what is worship, I believe. So that was the other main key section we spent quite a bit of time on, which was what is worship. We had some tangents about love, which we're going to talk about today in more detail, but we essentially said what is worship. Now, because it's so important, let's just remind ourselves what were like the three main elements of worship, notwithstanding the differences of opinion in the tradition, but there is a kind of trend that you can extrapolate from the ulama, the classical tradition, that worship is, number one,
submission.
Excellent. The pinnacle, the apex, the peak of submission or subjugation. And within that you have humility, you have fear, and we're going to go through a taxonomy of fear today as well from a Quranic perspective. And then the other one was?
Love.
Excellent. Love, that we must love Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then the third aspect was? Action. Perfect. MashaAllah, you guys have very good memories. So we spoke about what Ibn Kathir said, what Ibn Taymiyyah, what his students said. May Allah have mercy on all of them, and Al-Qurtubi as well, and so on and so forth. And generally speaking, what you see is it is the peak of submission, it's the peak of love, and it's expressing that peak of submission and love by directing acts of worship to Allah alone. So far so good? Okay, good. So, and obviously we spoke briefly about what the kind of objectives of worship are as well when we reflected upon Surah Al-Baqarah verse 30. Now, what I want to discuss today is a few things. Number one, I want to discuss what love is. It's critical in the conversation that we're having, because although it's going to relate to human love, but we're going to try and find out what does that mean in terms of loving Allah, loving the divine. We're also going to talk about submission. What is submission? And yes, when we think about it, we think about it from the point of view of submission to things that we can observe, like created beings or other authorities, but we're going to talk about what that means in the context of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then we're going to talk about how does love and submission actually relate. Because Ibn Taymiyyah and others, they said that they relate, they almost necessitate each other, love and submission, right? So after that, we're going to talk about what kind of love and submission we must have concerning Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Then we're going to go through a taxonomy of divine fear, rather that we should have fear of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but what type of fear. And then, if we have time, we should cover the idea that everybody worships. And we're going to do tadabbur of Quran 39 verse 29 and use it as a strategy for dawah as well. I think this is one of the most powerful aspects of this whole topic, because you transcend the kind of intellectualisms, because sometimes you can and you should have intellectual activity, but in many cases, if you refer to the phenomenological first person experience, the existential, what does it mean to exist, the psychological, the emotive, the innate aspects of the human, you could transcend all of the intellectualisms and go straight to worship, and it becomes extremely profound. So let's start. What's love? What is love?
I was, I think this, to get the ball rolling, maybe we could talk about the Arabic dictionary definitions of it. I remember one time I looked into it, and obviously the word there's different words in Arabic for it, hubb, mawadda,
Yes.
wood, all these kind of things. But if one does look at, for example, mawadda as a word, a lot of them, for example, Ibn Mandur mentions Lisan Arab, like he mentions one of the meanings is at-tamanni. Tamanni means wanting, like, and he actually, interesting, he uses a verse in the Quran, يود أحدهم لو يعمر ألف سنة وما هو بمزحزحه من العذاب يعمر. But you know, when in Surah Baqarah it talks about the Jews and polytheists, and it says that one of them wishes that they could live 1,000 years, but the word here is yawaddu, right? So he extrapolated that part of it, and he says, so one of the meanings of it is a tamanni. Another thing that I've seen in the dictionaries is maylan and ta'alluq, this idea of attachment. It's a very similar kind of concept, but that is something that is something that the dictionaries mention. As I say, the word wood or wid, I think that you can say it all three ways, from what I remember, or maybe two ways: wed and wood, or wid. There's these kinds of permutations of the word meaning the same thing. It obviously is one of Allah's names.
Yes.
So he said Wadud, and the different schools of thought have different ideas. The Atharis and Hanbalis believe that is muthbat, that is affirmed, that is something which is Allah is. And Ash'ari's Maturizi will say, actually, no, this is more like power and kindness, and well, you know the discussion and all that kind of thing.
Yes.
But I have my own definition of love. It's
And
difficult.
just on the wood part, it's like that's a loving that is giving.
Yeah.
So the kind of root is a loving that is giving, and you have also hub as well, which is related to the word for a seed, which is very interesting, because the Prophet ﷺ, he talked about that type of love when he said in the hadith that concerning the love of Khadija radiallahu anha, that her love nourished him, right? Which is quite interesting.
I was
Yeah.
blessed with her love.
Yes.
Yeah. So for me,
But carry on. Yeah. So what do you think love is?
it's difficult to, like, when I thought about it. Yeah, it's when obviously I think it's George Bernard Shaw who said something like, "Love is the overestimation of one person over everyone else." For me, love is defined through the negatives. Like, for example, when you fear losing it, you have anxiety. When you lose it, you have grief. So if you've lost that thing in your life and you don't have grief, then you never loved that thing in the first place. For instance, like if someone has a son or a daughter and then they lost their son or daughter, they were taken away from them, they would grieve that. Likewise, if someone went through a really hard breakup or divorce, they would go through grief, and they would go through the same grief cycle. So I think that what manifests it, or what it proves love, is grief and anxiety. Because if you fear that your parents or your children or whatever, they're gonna die or they're gonna leave you, then you have a sort of anxiety, and it's very difficult to differentiate in definition between platonic love and romantic love. If you really think about it, like if I wanted to, how do I differentiate in definition? The only thing I can say is it tastes different. It's got a different flavor. But I mean, someone could argue, oh, it's got a sexual element. Romantic love has a sexual element. But it's conceivable that you can love someone and not be sexually attracted to them. It's conceivable that you can be in love with someone and not have any sexual relationship with them in the first place. So the difficulty is in definition. I feel it's difficult to differentiate in definition. the platonic love and the romantic love, the only thing one can really say that I thought about is to say that it has a different first person experience or a different flavor. But these are, I've looked into, like, there's different definitions of love and stuff, and I realized that everyone has a different definition. I'd like to see what you're going to say.
Yeah,
today,
there's a lot there, bro. There's a lot. I'm not going to give you my view yet, because I want to pick from what everyone is saying.
Fine.
But what's very interesting about the anxiety or the fear is Al-Ghazali mentioned something very similar, that some types of fear or love necessitates some types of fear. Because if you really love something, you're going to fear losing it, or fear losing the consequences of the break of that relationship or that link, which is the type of fear that we should have for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which we're going to talk about, right?
Yeah.
So that's very interesting. It's actually very interesting that you looked into it very deeply as well, which says a lot about you, bro.
Well, it's one of those. I mean, I read the Ihya Ulumuddin, the whole book of it.
Yes.
He's got a book on love.
Yes.
And what I found interesting is that how he breaks down Allah's love. He was like, he broke it down almost like in evolutionary psychological ways.
Yeah, 5 reasons of love he has in there.
Yeah.
You're going to mention all of them.
You can mention that. Okay, so I'm not going to break.
No, it's good.
Yeah. So I just
but he's
remember him
misunderstood as well. Like, for example, and we're going to talk about this later in maybe a few weeks, when he talks about self-love.
Yeah.
People automatically think now something that's it's a sense of a selfishness. It's not. Actually, it's a little bit different, because self-love is actually you want goodness for yourself.
Well, I found it interesting how he rationalized God, loving God.
Yeah, 100%.
It was like, if what kind of things do you love? You love things that incur benefits upon you.
Yes.
So, for example, if someone's kind towards you, you love them.
Yes.
You end up loving someone is consistently kind and stuff like that. But who incurs more benefit than Allah? So he's rationalizing it.
Absolutely. But he would also argue that the kind of benefit that you should love is a benefit that's actually profoundly good for you, even though that you may not necessarily understand it. So it's not necessarily I'm going to get, like, if someone gives me, for example, I don't know, loads of sweets all the time, it's going to be bad for me eventually, right? So I love that act, but is that a true expression of self-love? Because he argues self-love is actually wanting true goodness for yourself, which is a bigger topic we'll unpack.
And it's interesting, the ayah in Surah Al-Rum, وَجَعَلَ بَيْنَهُمْ مَوَدَّةً وَرَحْمَةً.
Yes.
I found, I don't know what to make of it, but it's a lot of the Salaf said it was kinaya for sex. I don't know if kinaya meaning it was like
indication.
A indirect linguistic indication of that. I don't know how they came to that, but a lot of big figures, like if I remember correctly, like Al-Hasan al-Basri and a lot of these big figures had this thing where it says jima', which is basically intercourse. But and that's not shallow. but hijab, that's not shallow though, because the way the pious predecessors in the Islamic tradition sees sexual intercourse is not bestial. It's very, very deep. The French oriented this critique of the Quran, and they're like, it's just full of huris and this and the other. It's just a projection. It's like we don't have that view on sexuality. Okay, so since you're there, so what's love? What's love, Yusuf? What do you think love is?
It's funny you were talking about the negative, because I've had friends that have thought they were in love with someone, and then when they've sort of just parred them off, they've been heartbroken by it. And I've said that they didn't really love them. They didn't know them at all. It's been like a short-term relationship. So I see love...
infatuation or something.
Yeah, like a lust more than anything. Because they didn't know them. It was like a short relationship. And they became obsessed with them. And they were grieved at the loss. But for me, it seems strange that they even said they loved them so quickly. I've always connected love to knowing. And the more you know... I've never really been a believer in like love at first sight, for example. For me, love is something that develops and builds as you grow to know.
Yes, that's very powerful.
Someone.
Al-Ghazali mentions this. He says he considers love as the highest form of cognition.
Although Ibn Hazm has the opposite view, by the way. Tawq al-Hamam, the famous book that he wrote. He believes in love at first sight. You see, all that kind of stuff. And he loved, his story with that slave girl. He loved the slave girl, and then she died, and he went through grief for lots of time. And that's why he wrote the book. Ibn Hazm has a very interesting, it's been translated into English. It's a very good book,
But what's interesting with your point is Al-Ghazali says that the more you know Allah, the more you love Him. And he considers love as the highest form of cognition.
What you mentioned, I think, is quite profound, because I actually, for some reason or another, was looking into the difference between infatuation and love. right? And I came across a study actually. UCL, University College London, had I think one of the only studies on infatuation and love, and they had these participants, and they said that you're from the university, right next. They said that basically infatuation, they categorized it in a very specific type of way in the study, and they said it's characterized by a state of euphoria, upliftment, ecstasy, where you're having positive illusions about the person, where you start making fictions about them, where you start to idealize them.
Yeah.
So you start seeing what you want to see about them rather than what they actually are.
You become blind to their faults.
Yeah.
And you sort of exaggerate whatever good is in them, like beyond what is actually present.
And what the study said was that after about, I think it said about 18 months or something, the infatuation pathways in the brain change into love pathways. Like they become something more sophisticated, more mature. So they do, but to be fair though, a lot of the psychologists, from what I've read, they do consider infatuation as a type of love. They don't dismiss it as love. And that's where it becomes quite subjective. I mean, it's very difficult to know where it starts and where it ends and stuff.
Anything positive about love rather than the negatives, like, you know, what love isn't, or what is love?
I think with simple words, we can describe it as emotions characterized by deep connection, care to something or someone.
Interesting.
And it differs. A love of children is a different thing than love of some lady you love someone.
Yes.
Love of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, love of worldly things like غير ذي روح. I think it appears differently. Some scholars say that love is one, all love is one, but it appears on different position. Like you see your children, you love them. Later on, you see a lady that you love, and it appears with her. So it's a different status, moves around.
Okay, so here you got like affection and care. Yeah. Okay, good. And you also associate with feeling, with emotions. Okay, excellent.
Can I mention a different
Come on, bro, you're a Turk. You have to talk about love. Turks are very, very passionate when it comes to these things.
I'm not going to talk about like strictly love between a man and a woman.
Yes,
like,
talk
it could
about
be
the
anything.
idea of.
Yeah.
Yes, go on.
Like the idea of love in my mind, I was thinking about it, and I can't exhaust every possible definition like hijab does. But what I think is it's the cure for the misery that you have. So, for example, let's say that you're stressed and you're looking for a blissful life, and you start watching films, and that film, the world that you enter, becomes blissful and therefore cures that misery that you live in real life, and then that starts to become, you start to build a relationship with films now, and then you become in love with films. So you're like, yeah, I love watching films. So that's a kind of love. And that same cure to misery can happen in all aspects of life, whether that's loving your dog, whether that's loving your wife, whether that's loving reading books, and so on. Yeah, so.
Okay, that's interesting.
To add to that,
Yes,
I'd
please.
say with the hadith of the Prophet Muhammad
Sallam.
you are with who you love.
المرء مع من أحب.
انت مع من احببت كما قال. Arabic, I'm trying to make Iraqi slightly, I don't know unfortunately. So I'd say love is when you surround yourself with the things you love. So it's more of an action here. So it's the emotions within yourself is love, and then you actualize it into the world.
Yes.
So for example, if you love your wife, you're going to spend time with your wife. If you love Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you'll actualize that by praying and by doing sujood and dhikr to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So, and I think you said previously in a different video, you are your interactions.
Yeah,
and if you
are
love
your
something,
relations, yeah.
you are your relations. And if you love something, you want those relations to occur consistently. So I'd say
This is interesting.
it's with the actions. Yeah.
Jazakallah khair. Anything else? You want to say something, brother, please? I could just see you're almost about to break your laptop. Yalla. Say it.
So I was watching a video, and it was from a rabbi, and he was telling a story of a man that was fishing, and so someone approaches him and says, "What are you doing?" He says, "Oh, I am fishing. I love fish." And he said, "Oh, that's interesting. Why do you love fish?" He said, "Well, when I eat it, it tastes nice, and I get energized." And he said, "Well, you don't really love the fish. love yourself, because it's sort of you're using it to have an impact on yourself. So that, he said, most love is sort of fish love, where you're basically
I've seen that one.
yeah,
The really long beard,
very
isn't it?
long beard, yeah.
Yeah, that's it. He was
Very,
a
very
pretty
long
profound guy.
Yeah.
Hopefully he doesn't support the genocide, you know?
I hope not.
Hope not, yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
keep going. Sorry, yeah.
So, if love is purely internal, like it's only what benefits you, then it will have those negative characteristics. But if it's a mixture of internal and external, that's where I think there's harmony.
Okay,
involved.
it's very interesting. Zubair, you want to say something?
Yeah, briefly. Just, I think there's maybe kinds of love. One that is more transactional, because you love this person because they're doing something for you, and as opposed to loving for your kids or your parents, where the mum loves the child, where it's more unconditional. So I think there's a distinction there.
Yeah. This is very interesting. Okay, look.
Can I say
Yeah, of
one
course,
more
you
thing?
can as much as you
It
want.
just-
I
it
don't. I
just-
could speak about love for hours, no problem.
So I just wanted to say.
But we'll have to like move on
Yeah,
after this. one,
very
inshallah.
briefly,
Yeah.
I'd like to say like sacrifice is a lot like part of love. Because when you see the other person sacrifice so much for you, somehow it builds love. I'm not sure how.
That's true, but it's the other way around as well. Like you would sacrifice because you love, but sacrifice is always selfish.
But like your mom and dad,
Like for
why do you love
example,
them?
like would I
So they sacrifice.
die for my family? Obviously, there's a sense of honor there. There's a sense of duty and commitment, and that's my role. But it's also because I love them, and me not sacrificing is far more painful than me sacrificing. Yeah, like Rachel Corrie, that was basically bulldozed by the Zionists, the American activist. Yes, that's sacrificial, and she was altruistic, but that altruism is fundamentally selfish, but not in the term as we understand it. It's that she was in touch with herself. She had self-love because the pain of her not doing nothing for her was greater than the pain of doing something. Yeah.
I have a problem with this idea of, like, I think when you do make like sacrifice, there's not this rationalization that goes on behind it. Sometimes it's like, it's just an act. Like for example, if anything was to come to harm your children, you would, you're not thinking about how you would act if you didn't do anything. These are not thoughts that cross your mind. Like if
But it's
something
pain
was,
and pleasure. Those are not rational, isn't it?
yeah, but it's. Do you know what I mean in terms of like the way you described it there? It's like if I didn't do anything, I don't think I could live with myself. If something was going to harm my daughter, and I had this urge to just like jump in the way of it or protect her from that. There isn't any thinking. There's just doing. Like you're just.
But is that driven by feeling?
I don't know what it's driven by, but it's
Well,
not.
I think
thought.
it's definitely driven by feeling that you adore that person, and well, even using the word know is a bit problematic, but you're driven by the fact that you're in pain if the course of action continues. I don't intervene. That's just a feeling, or it could be that you've developed within you certain virtues that this is an automatic response that you have, which is true as well. So you're right to a certain degree, but I do think we don't have a rational calculus, but it's an emotional thing that we know. Like it's like intuitive. I could not, if I could swim very well and I saw someone drowning, I would try my best because it's painful not to try my best. Now, don't think pain here in context of like just physical pain. It's an internal sensation, isn't it? Yeah. Which is not a rational thing. It's not a rational calculation.
You will be annoyed later on if you don't do that.
Well, but you don't really project that.
Yeah,
but
you
at
don't
that
really-
moment, you're in a state of angst.
No, but
yeah.
you feel like you're a coward if you don't go and
Well, that's
save the
one
person.
element too. That's why I
Yeah.
mentioned duty and so on and so forth. That's one element too. But there's all of those things combined, I think. Yes, Abdullah.
I think there's one element of al-muwadda that's missing. It's not just giving, as the ulama they say, it's giving without expecting anything in return.
Thank you. I was
that's-
waiting for that
yeah,
one.
because that's what al-muwadda means, and that's why it's the only name out of. So Ibn al-Qayyim rahimahullah, he has maratib al-hub, not just love definitions. He has like categorization.
yeah.
This is first, this is second, this is third, and he actually puts muwadda like at fourth, I think, which I personally didn't find as correct, quote unquote, because muwadda is when like I said, you give something and without expecting anything in return, and it's the only name out of the maratib al-hub that I mentioned with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, al-wadud.
Yes.
It's the only name that's given to Allah. He's al-wadud.
Yeah, it's a love that is giving.
Exactly, and it's so interesting, al-wadud in general, because with the names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allah is the only actor. Ar-Rahman, we can't be Ar-Rahman to Allah. Al-Jabbar, we can't be Al-Jabbar to Allah. But when it comes to Al-Wudud, he's the fa'il and we're the maf'ul bihi, meaning he also gets the action of our love happening upon him as well as he loves us as well. So al-muwadda to me is one of the strongest, forms of love that one can attain. That would be love to me. Action without expecting anything in return.
Yeah. Okay. Let's try and summarize and square the circle here. Yeah. Because I'm going to be honest from the beginning.
Yes.
This is an impossible conversation. It's an impossible conversation. Yeah. So when I've been looking at this in detail, I even bought a book recently. I forgot who the person is now. It's on the Hanabila and love. Yeah. Love theory amongst the Hanbalites. Yeah, it's a very, very interesting book actually. Now, I've looked at it from a Western perspective and an Eastern perspective. I haven't read all the literature, but I've been thinking about this for a very, 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 very long time, maybe over 2 decades, maybe. The reason being is because my dad brought me up in that kind of humanist tradition. Yeah, he's not religious per se, but he loves the words of Jesus. He doesn't believe in dogma or Christianity per se as a religion, but he has that kind of spirituality, and love was the thing. Right? So, and I've been thinking about this for such a long time because it's come from my background, yeah? So the first thing I think we should unpack is, let's start poetically, yeah? So what did Rumi say? The Hanafi jurist, right? He gets whitewashed, isn't it? Yeah, he's a Hanafi jurist. He said, a pen went scribbling along. When it tried to write love, it broke, right? Now, this opens the door now to a conversation. Now, what's very interesting, you have the Western tradition. You have M. Scott Peck in his book, The Road Less Traveled. He says, in attempting to examine love, we will be beginning to toy with mystery. In a very real sense, we'll be attempting to examine the unexaminable and to know the unknowable, right? And how does he reason this? He says, it's too large, too deep, ever to be truly understood or measured or limited within the framework of words. Yeah, that's why sometimes if you want to express your love to someone, it's like words won't do it justice. Like there's a Greek song, right? If I said all the I love yous in every language, it won't be enough, kind of thing. Yeah, do you see my point? And Rusmir Mahmud Jahajic, he's a Bosnian intellectual, by the way, very interesting. He actually wrote about love, and you know what he said? He basically said that you can't rationalize this. You're using the wrong tools, right? For example, rationalization is things like calculation, measurement, inference, induction, all of these things, and they lose their meaning when you're talking about love. You can't, like, where is love? How can you measure love, really? It's like almost an impossible task. So he basically says that, rationality lacks the key attributes that are required in order to assess what love is. He says rationality is based on things like comparison, measurement, and calculation, all of which, in his words, lose both their importance and their meaning in love. Now, in the Western tradition, there's a lot of work on this, actually. Now, I just wanted to quote you someone that I felt was really, really profound, to be honest. It really kind of took me. But before we do that, let's go to the famous Erich Fromm in his book, The Art of Loving. And he actually had a issue with love in the Western tradition, especially in a capitalist and materialistic sense. In another book that was published after his death, I believe it's called The Way of Being, he basically argues that we have developed, because of kind of capitalism or materialism, a way of having. That's our state of being now. And these things that you have, they're not means to an end, they're ends in themselves. And he said we've become like, he didn't use these words, but basically, I think, he used the word cripples. We become moral cripples. Because when you don't have those things anymore, because they become your crutches, then who are you? What do you really have? Yeah. And echoing in his book, The Art of Loving, he actually mentions something quite profound. And he says, what is the outcome? Modern man is alienated from himself, from his fellow men, and from nature. He has been transformed into a commodity, experiences his life forces as an investment which must bring him maximal profit obtainable under existing market conditions. So that's how he experiences life. Human relations are essentially those of alienated automations, each basing his security on staying close to the herd and not being different in thought, feeling, or action. While everyone tries to be as close as possible to the rest, everybody remains utterly alone, pervaded by the deep sense of insecurity, anxiety, and guilt, which results when human separateness cannot be overcome. The situation, as far as love is concerned, corresponds, as it has to by necessity, to this social character of modern man. Automatons cannot love. They can exchange the personality packages and hope for a fair bargain. So he had a kind of dark take on love in a capitalist sense. But also Eric Fromm argues that love is an activity not for not a passive effect. He says it's a standing in, not a falling for, and that echoes also what M. Scott Peck says, that he's got a section in his book that says love is not a feeling. Yes, there are feelings, but it's not just a feeling. Love is not a falling in, it's a standing for, that you make a decision that you stand for someone. Yeah, I am committed to you, to your well-being, to your goodness. Yeah. And obviously we know the 5 love languages, everyone knows them, it's a very famous book. These are not internal feelings, it's not a passive thing, it's active. For example, touch, words of affirmation, quality time, gifts. What was the other one? Acts of service. Those things are manifestations. They act in the world, which is very interesting. Find out, if you're married, how your spouse feels loved. Because, for example, if my love languages are quality time and acts of service, and I'm just giving her quality time and acts of service, but if that's not her love language, she won't feel loved, no matter what you do. And that's why love requires humility, to understand how do they feel loved. Because the arrogant person is just projecting himself on the beloved. But I am always giving them quality time and acts of service. Yeah, but that's not how they feel loved, bro. Right? Do you see the point? So you have to be humble enough, or at least submissive enough to a certain degree, to understand or stand in the possibility that their love languages or the way they feel loved is totally different. If that's the case, then you need to explore that. But it's difficult to love someone in that way if it's not the same as your love languages. So that requires commitment to their well-being. Do you see? Because I don't believe many people know how to love. Because they just love the way they feel loved. But that means you haven't considered the other into consideration. And that's what from Byung-Han Chul, or Chul Han. He's a Korean-born German philosopher. They say he's one of the most paradigm-shifting philosophers in our generation, right? He wrote the book The Agony of Eros and other books. And many of his concepts are interrelated. And he basically says, look, in our narcissistic world, we don't know how to love anymore, because to love, you require an other. But there is a disappearance of the other. That's his words. The other has disappeared because this neoliberalism, this secularism wants everyone to be the same, essentially, right? And what he argues is that since there isn't an other person, because devoid of the individuality, what you do, you project yourself on them, and all you do is end up loving yourself, not them. It's actually really powerful, yeah? It's really profound, yeah? It's deep. So that's why love does really entail a sense of humility, and it entails a sense of commitment to their well-being, because you're going to be doing things that is unnatural to you. But wallahi, once you start doing that, then the reciprocation and the way things develop is something beyond you can ever imagine, right? But that's something that we could unpack after. But what's very important is this now, yeah, is that, love is very kind of self-actualizational, if that's a word, yeah. I think he was a Catholic philosopher, Jean-Luc Marion, yeah, French philosopher. He first and foremost provided a kind of a condemnation of love in kind of the Western tradition, or in the world. He says, the result of all these failed efforts is that ordinary people, or put another way, all those who love without knowing what love wants to say, or what it wants of them, or above all how to survive it, that is to say, you and I, first and foremost, believe themselves condemned to feed on scraps. The desperate sentimentalism of popular prose, the frustrated pornography of the idol industry, or the shapeless ideology of that boastful asphyxiation known as self-actualization. So basically what he argues in his works is this. He says a fundamental question in philosophy is, do I exist? But you know what he says? He says there's more a fundamental question. When I read this, I quite moved actually, yeah? He says, does anyone love me? Now think about this, yeah? So in this question, the me of identity is not a me constituted out of the ego or your I, rather it is the me as touched and affected by the other. What you are is what loves you. Do you know what I'm saying, bro? Do you know what
Say that again. Repeat
yeah.
that.
What you are is what loves you. And that's very interesting about your relations, right? Yeah. So how you relate with others. Remember we said that last week. To be is to be related. You are exposed, or you become through your relations. Yeah. So in those relationships, those people that love you, the very fact that they love you, this is who you are. Do you see? Or a sense of parts of yourself are revealed in that process, right? So what Marion is saying is that you can only discover yourself in the process of finding love. And I'm telling you, this is so true. Like the Prophet said about marriage is half of your deen. Yeah? Half of your deen. Now there's many discussions on this, but let's do some tadabbur here. Marriage is half of your deen because it's a mirror. It's a mirror. Anyone who's been married for at least more than 3 years will know marriage is a mirror. You are revealed in the process. My wife knows all the rubbish about me. Yeah? She knows all the rubbish. She knows all the good as well. In actual fact, she knows things that I'm not aware of. Yeah. Good, by the way. Yeah? Yeah? Like I was discussing with her what Muhammad Hijab said to me one day. It was very profound. Me and Hijab have these deep conversations sometimes. Hijab said, look, I think he said something like, you're not humble, bro. You just have an inferiority complex. And he was right. Wallahi, he was right. He was actually right on this particular issue. And my wife basically said to me, hijab is right. But she said, I prefer you this way, rather than a superiority complex. But we need to work on making it more into real humility rather than inferiority complex, because there's other reasons why that's the case. So you get revealed through your, look, my relationship with hijab, something was revealed, and that really awakened me to certain things, and I've adjusted sometimes, you know, the way I approach things, because that's a loving relationship I have with the hijab, and he tells me who I am. You know, to be is to be related, right? Similarly, when it comes to the wife issue, you know, half your deen, why? It's a mirror, right? You know, what you are is what loves you. You reveal yourself in the process. And you find yourself in the process of finding love. Like many would argue, and you know, I'm not going to say this about me per se, because obviously it's going to be public, but when you're married or when you're in love, and you know, obviously I became Muslim like 22 years ago, even before when so-called I was in love, you'll have the peak of pleasure and the peak of hatred. Like you'd find feelings that you've never found before. And they come through you like, wow. And because it's through the process of finding love, you are revealed in that process. Now, Elizabeth Drummond Young, she summarizes Marion's position on love in this way. And I wanted to quote it because it's very profound. She says, the first is Marion's claim that love comes before being. By this, he means that in choosing to love in a certain way, we determine the very nature of ourselves. We cannot know ourselves until we choose to love someone. When we love someone, we come to appreciate the boundaries of ourselves and that we are unique. In doing so, we recognize that the one we love must also be unique. Anyway, so let's yes, but who's asked the question?
Me.
Just to bear with me, I just want to
Okay,
summarize
sure,
something,
sure.
yeah? Look, you know, when you look at the works of Al-Ghazali, look at the works of M. Scott Peck, Eric Fromm, and others, and even in the Islamic tradition, there are a lot of taxonomies of divine love. You have, you know, Aristotle talked about philia. Philia is a very kind of deep love, whereby I think he described it as you get two souls and you put it in a bottle and you shake the bottle and you can't distinguish which soul belongs to whom, right? That kind of like oneness in a way, right? You have in the Greek language agape, you know, and you have that in the biblical tradition as well. You have the words philia and agape as well. Agape is like a very kind of passionate love. You have erota or eros, right? Which is more like, you know, maybe a passionate love or a romantic love. So you have different taxonomies, right? You know, brotherly love, natural love, because we know this, right? Like, you know, in the Quran, we know that Muslim men can marry, people of the book, Christians and Jews, right? You know, Allah doesn't expect you to hate your wife, right? No, there's going to be a natural love there. So there is. I don't want to focus too much on the taxonomies of love. The reason I was mentioning all of this is just to try and now figure out what are the kind of non-negotiables concerning love. There are certain, although there could be a debate on love, massive debates on taxonomies and categorizations, and friendly love, brotherly love, romantic love, and so on and so forth. But let's now focus on what are the kind of essential elements of love. And that's what we need for the discussion so far today. And I think I've produced a list. I want you to hear this, and I think it's a lot of the things that you've said actually relate. So the first thing is, if someone's in love, now this is not necessary for love, but it is one of the aspects of love, yeah? The lover relates to the beloved in a way that intends good for them. Can anyone disagree with that? So if I love someone, I'm going to intend good for them. I'm going to be committed to the goodness, the guidance, and the well-being. That's not an alien thing. That's intuitively quite true, right? So, and this is how you could think about it. If someone is in love and they don't intend good for that person, then are they in love?
Maybe.
But sometimes
That's a discussion. Whether it happens in action, what about what the intention, the relational aspect. So love,
for example, if you lose someone, if somebody else gets you a love, for example, you love a lady and she is married to someone else, you won't harm for the lady as well. So it means your emotions, everything changes. You
so
love
that's
her.
very good. That's okay. But is that love though?
But that
Yeah.
before you said, when you're in love, you'll feel the heights of love and of hate.
Yes.
So would the height of hate not be related to the love connection?
Yeah, it could be, but let's explore his example a little bit, yeah? So you're saying if you loved a lady
Yeah.
and then the lady was with someone else, you would basically not want good for them.
Yeah. You can.
But
harm.
I don't think that's actually true. You need to explore that emotion. You think by being with you is good for them.
So that's
Why. But that's not intending bad for them though. Do you see? Because if you wanted to be with a lady or beloved, and then she happens to go with someone else, and you're like, no, she should be with me, why are you assuming that means you intend bad for them? Because the lover would be like, no, to be with me is good for her. So you're not intending bad at all.
But you can harm
Who?
the one you love.
Well, I don't know, bro. There's a cultural difference here. Yeah, I don't know.
For example,
Yeah.
if somebody loves some a random person come and he takes your love, and then you can harm the guy.
Yeah, that's
let's say.
fine. Obviously, yeah.
But then you actually harm your love,
Why?
because she's there with him, and you harmed him.
Yeah, but you don't see it as harm. You see it as good. You still intend good for her because being
But
with you.
in reality, it's harm.
It depends from what perspective. Yeah.
There's layers to the harm
point
and
is,
the
don't think
benefit.
about the kind of spontaneous, immediate reactions. Think about your relation and your intent, yeah, and how you're directing that intent to the person, yeah. You're not intending bad for them, even if your yearning for her is not satisfied.
Can I give an example?
Yeah. Yes, please.
So if you go to the gym, it hurts. Yeah. What you're kind of doing is you're looking at the pain that the gym has given you and saying, but you've intended harm. But you're not. That when you're doing the harm, you think it's for some sort of greater good or greater benefit.
Yeah.
That is the good that you do intend. And in the same way with the gym, like you go and if you're only looking at that immediate pain, then you might just say, oh, it's just harm, but that's not the whole point of the gym, is it? It's like you overlook the pain and you overlook the suffering in the short term because you want that benefit or the greater good in the long run. And there's like layers to it and levels, so there might be pain here, but then it's what's really intended is the pleasure or the good.
So in general, we can say that the lover relates to the beloved in a way that intends good for them, yeah? Is committed to the goodness, the guidance, the well-being. That's number one. And they act in accordance to that, in general. There's no need for deviations with regards to exceptions, yeah? So in general, we could say when someone's in love, they relate to the beloved in a way that wants good for them, their well-being, their guidance, and acts in accordance to that. Second point, when you're in love, you want someone to be the best version of themselves. Not always, but generally speaking, when you love someone, you are concerned for them. You want them to be optimal versions for themselves, or at least they're on a path to achieve that optimality, if that's a word, yeah? So, like, you know, with one spouse, you know, you want good for them. If, you know, they're not doing the dhikr, for example, in the morning, in the evening, they've stopped for a bit, you want to encourage them because you actually intend and want good for them, and you want them to be optimal versions of themselves, yeah? The other thing is, you give without benefiting or seeking benefit, yeah? You give without benefiting directly or seeking any benefit. The other one is you want to receive the love of the beloved. This is quite key. It's not always, but in general, if you love an object of love, like another human being, you want to receive love in return. You want to receive their love. Also, if you love someone or something, you want the beloved to be pleased or happy. Right? Like, for example, if you love someone, do you want them to be unhappy? No. Okay? And the beloved takes priority. Yeah? Could we disagree with these, really? These are aspects of love. I'm not saying we've solved the problem or solved the perennial question. I'm not arrogant enough to even claim that. No way. We're not going to solve this problem. But these are aspects of love in general. There may be some specific scenarios where it might not be the case, but in general, I don't think anyone intuitively is going to disagree with the fact that the lover relates to the beloved in a way that intends good for them and acts in accordance to that, wants them to be optimal versions of themselves, gives without benefit or seeking benefit, wants to receive the love of the beloved, wants the beloved to be pleased or happy, and the beloved takes priority. So far, so good? Can we I think we can move on, yeah? Now, okay. Now, before we get into this, let's talk about now submission. And we could do this quickly. What is submission? And then talk about how love and submission interrelate. Yeah. The reason I'm doing this at length a little bit is because when the ulama spoke about that ibadah, worship, is the peak of love and peak of submission, and they entail each other, it would allow you to conceptualize this and internalize this further. Yeah. So, what is submission? This is hopefully an easier one.
Surrendering yourself to God, or just fully surrendering
to God, but as an idea.
To prioritize someone else on yourself.
Well, you could prioritize someone else over yourself because you love them, not necessarily that you submit to them, yeah? What's the idea of submission?
The roof of love.
Obedience, yeah. So you're yielding to an authority, yeah? You submit to an authority. Why would you submit to that authority?
Could you recognize their authority?
Superiority?
Yeah, but they're superior. They may have power, strength, but it could also be due to. Well, it could be due to you love them, but
fear them.
Yes, it could be because you're forced to do it as well. You could submit not out of an intellectual or phenomenological or an existential thing, like, you know, you've had this realization that yes, they're an authority, they're higher than me, they're more smart than me, I'm going to submit to them. No, that doesn't necessarily follow. It could be that they force you to submit, right? They force you to accept their authority. So there's different types of submission. What's interesting in the Western tradition, there's intellectual submission all the time, or intellectual surrendering, yeah? You know, I remember when I was dealing with the problem of evil, and one of the arguments was, well, the logical argument and even the evidential form is quite false because you're not bringing to the equation God's wisdom. And they were like, oh, but God's wisdom, that's a cop-out. It's not. It's not a cop-out at all, because God, you are making the attack against the divine, and God is Al-Hakim, the wise, and His wisdom is total and perfect, and we just have a pixelated understanding of reality. And it's not a cop-out because the door swings both ways. Don't you intellectually surrender all the time? Now, if you look into Western philosophy, you understand this thing called the philosophy of epistemology. The philosophy of testimony, or the epistemology of testimony, which is, by the way, one of the key sources of knowledge. This is well known in the Western tradition. The epistemology of testimony, meaning the say-so of others. Yes, there's a massive discussion on what constitutes valid testimony and what are the rational criteria to use to establish valid testimony. The point is, they do not dismiss it, which is very interesting. C.A. Cody wrote the book, I think, Testimony, a Philosophical Discussion, and he has a kind of like a debate with David Hume, not a live one because David Hume died way before. But he basically argues that David Hume's understanding of testimony was wrong, because as you know, the Scottish skeptic David Hume, he was an empiricist. And he basically argues that, yes, we accept testimony because it's useful. Why? Because it agrees with our collective experiences. He didn't see testimony as fundamental and necessary for knowledge. So C.A. Cody comes, and that's a landmark book in the epistemology of testimony, by the way. It's about a 30-year-old revived area of philosophical discussion. And he says, Hume's wrong. Hume's wrong because how do you know people's collective experiences? You have to acquire through the say-so of others. And if you're just relying on your own personal experience, you won't have knowledge. So he says this proves that testimony is fundamental and indispensable. Even when you go to the kind of summary of the method, the scientific method, go to the Berkeley website, they mention that a key aspect of the scientific method today in contemporary world is actually the discoveries of other scientists that you have to submit to. Because you don't have the resources to repeat every single study. Even if it's repeatable, you can't do it yourself. I remember in the famous debate with Krauss, I asked him about evolution, and I was trying to expose a metaphysical presupposition that he had, that everything is, I just do the science, and I'm going to just refer to the empirical world. And I said, well, there are other sources of knowledge. And I said, and he said, like what? And I said, testimony. And he sniggered at me. And I said to him, okay, do you believe in evolution? He said, yes. I said, have you done all the science yourself? And everyone started laughing at him because people realized that it's impossible. It's such a big domain of scientific inquiry that you cannot investigate everything. In actual fact, a lot of knowledge that you have, about 80% is probably testimonial. Even the world being round. Now, why am I focusing on this? To show that we have epistemic surrendering. We have epistemic surrendering. You have to submit intellectually, you do, without a doubt. You may have a potential to investigate and so on and so forth, but a lot of our knowledge now is because of epistemic surrendering. Elizabeth Fricker, she's an epistemologist, she says this. She says, given that my limitations are parametric, I have to basically intellectually submit to the authority of others, in essence. And she argues things like, I'm not a mechanic, I have to go to a mechanic, It's like when we go to a doctor and we give them the symptoms and they say, here's the medicine, take the medicine. Fine, we may go for a second opinion or a third opinion, but when we do that, we're not going to start questioning their background and their academic background, and we're not going to look at the drug and put it underneath a microscope and start assessing the molecular structure of the drug. Oh, we surrender, we submit, right? When I'm on a plane, and unfortunately I'm on planes regularly, and the pilot says, we've got turbulence, sit down, I'm not going to start saying, what does he know? And start doing a moonwalk on the aisle. Yeah? Do some No, I'm going to sit down, man, and make dua. I hate turbulence, yeah? I don't know much about the science of turbulence. I've got much better now, but you submit to an authority. When you go to university and you're studying set theory or calculus or mathematics, you don't start going to your professor, what are you talking about? Shut your mouth, yeah? You do a hijab-esque response to the professor, yeah? Shut your mouth. No, you don't. You're like, okay, you're the authority. I accept you're the authority by virtue of various other conditions. And therefore I'm going to submit to your authority. Simple as that. So that's one example. But you have submission in many other aspects, in politics and so many different domains of life in the Western world. So submission is you yield to an authority, is to surrender to the power, strength or superiority of another thing or being, or you could submit due to the force or due to acceptance. Now, how is submission related to love? By the way, we're not going to be able to cover everything that I said we're going to cover today, but how is submission related to love?
Do you want to ask a question?
Yeah, of course.
With submission, is there a sort of inference to some type of tension? Like, in order to submit, is there not some sort of will or desire to do the opposite?
Not always.
But is it not?
Like, for example, if I want good for myself, which is actually a form of self-love. And oh, by the way, the reason we didn't unpack self-love previously, because we're going to unpack it when we talk about how self-love leads to divine love, because Al-Ghazali speaks about this a lot, yeah? So that's why I deliberately didn't unpack it too much. So, you know, I would rather submit to, like say intellectually, I'll submit to a doctor than to my own opinion, because I want good for myself. There's no tension there. Because I know by virtue of their authority, they're better, they're more accurate, are more likely to get healed and be on the path to healing. So that for me is not really attention. It's more of a willful, peaceful submission and acceptance. But there can be cases where you submit because of that tension. And you know, obviously spiritually, it could be because you want to. You may have an ego. You know that you need to listen to them, just like kids with their parents sometimes, or teenagers with their parents. You know the parents have more wisdom. You know the parents are smart. You know the parents really love them, want best for them. But we have our own internal, you know, shahawat, blameworthy desires, our ego. God knows what it is. There's a tension there for sure, but it's not always a tension. Yeah, is that clear? But yeah, tension can exist. How is submission related to love, and how is love related to submission? Yes, brother.
So I said knowledge. The reason I said that was just like your example where the children listen to their parents because they know better than them. They have more wisdom than them. And in the past, a lot of scholars have said that, you know, the apex of knowledge is love. So submitting to that love is having knowledge yourself, to understand that that is the highest level of knowledge that comes from Allah, who has the entirety of the wisdom.
Yeah, so that could be true. So love and submission can relate from the point of view that if you have more knowledge about someone, you're going to submit to them by virtue of their knowledge, and in having knowledge of that person, it can create love, because the more you know something, the more you love them. It's not necessary, because you could have knowledge of something and not necessarily love it and still submit to it. For example, I have knowledge that the doctor knows more than me. I'm going to submit to their authority, right, because they're doctors, but I don't necessarily love my doctor, right? Do you see the point? But yeah, but what you're saying is true, but not necessary. But there is a relation there for sure.
I think with obedience or submission comes like a type of reward, and that could be love. And that's why they could be related in there. As a type of reward for obedience, love could be. Like, if you're obedient to, for example, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you could be rewarded. That reward could be love. And with love was that 5-6 things that you mentioned. You get that through obedience.
Yeah, but is that the reason for why they submit? Because they want to receive the love?
Maybe. Well, ultimately, you want good.
I need to think about that.
Like there's self-love. Like you want Jannah, you want.
Okay, I need to think about that one. Yeah.
I was one time listening, and it says, you know, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala controls everything, and He sort of determines everything. So when I love Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that means Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala loves me enough that He wants me to love Him. So that's where I will sort of love Him even more. So it's sort of a...
Yeah, save that beautiful thought, because we're not connecting it to how we should love Allah yet. Just as the idea of submission and love, how do they relate to each other? Because what Ibn Taymiyyah said, that love entails submission and submission entails love. You can't love something that you don't really submit to, and you can't submit to something that you don't really love, right? And obviously he had particular conceptualizations of what that submission meant, but I want just to get the link, the conceptual link in your head. When is it, or how is it the case that submission and love both relate to each other?
So when you love someone, if there is that conflict in will, the submission will come in. You love them, so you will allow their will to supersede your own.
Yeah, in some cases that could be the case.
Like, for example, if you want to watch a film or something, and your wife wants to watch a particular film and you don't, but you love her, so you want to make her happy, and like you submit
Astaghfirullah, what's wrong with you, man? What the hell,
No,
man?
like in terms of
What is this?
Okay, so I know what you're saying here. What you're saying here is.
no, in a particular
But okay,
circumstance, not in every
let's
case.
go back
but-
to what we said. What the certain kind of non-negotiables of love are. That you want the beloved to be pleased. Yes. So sometimes there may be some form of submission, or humility, because remember they're synonymous in this context, in order for them to be pleased. We could agree with that. Now, whether that's going to be the man and the wife and the man, that's a different discussion, yeah? But the point is, can we think about scenarios where if you want the beloved to be pleased, you would submit in some way in order for them to be pleased?
I think when you love someone, you set aside your own desires because of her. You love her and you submit. You put your
Guys, we need to be careful. Wait. Time out. 1 second, yeah? Habibi, let's not focus this on like man-wife relationship, yeah? Think of it about as an idea, yeah? Because we're getting into dangerous ground here. People are going to start saying that in Islam the man has to submit to his wife,
No, you're
which is
talking
totally not the case, yeah?
If you're talking generally, though,
Yeah.
you could talk about even. All right, you're at a movie with your friends, or like, we
Yeah, for sure.
Hijab
sure,
wants
yes.
something to order from one place, I want to order from another. I have love for him, and so,
So
I submit
essentially,
and I go, okay.
good. So what you're saying is this, Yusuf. You are submitting to the force of the love that you have for the beloved,
Yes.
and that entails humility. It's very hard to be an arrogant lover, in the way that we described what the key aspects of love are. Yeah. So there needs to be a sense of humility. Humility is like the stepping stone to submission. Yeah. Do you see what I'm saying here? Yeah. So what you do, because you have that love for someone, it's intentional, directional, relational. You want good for them, you want guidance for them, you want them to be optimal versions of themselves, you want them to be pleased, you want to receive their love, and so on and so forth. There's going to be an element of that you are now, the power of that love makes you surrender to a certain degree. Your ego, for example, that you won't let your ego get in the way. Obviously sometimes we do, but generally speaking, your ego will get in the way. Even, for example, in leadership, I like to try and adopt love service leadership. There's many times that I just want to strangle someone, right? But then you just train yourself and you realize, no, that's not who I am. It's love service leadership, and that idea, or that the way I've identified has submitted my ego, or submitted my anger, if you like, or my frustration. And that requires a sense of humility. So, and humility is a kind of, building blocks to submission from that perspective. And that's why, one would argue that the ego finds no home in love, right? It's very hard to be a egotistical or arrogant lover. Obviously there's going to be some aspects of it because we're human, but it is very, very hard, that you're going to surrender to the dictates of your ego, right? No, you're going to surrender to the power of your love, that you're standing in for someone. I'm standing in for you now, bro. It's relational, intentional, directional. I want you to be happy. I'm committed to your goodness and kindness. I've made that decision. I'm standing in for you. And forget the feeling for a moment. I'm standing in for you, that I want goodness and guidance for you and committed to your well-being. I want to receive your love. I want you to be happy. I want you to be pleased. And I'm going to give you without benefiting. All of those things require a sense of surrendering and humility. You have to surrender away your ego. You have to actually be humble. You're submitting to the power of that decision, the power of that standing in for, the power of loving the beloved. Do you see the point? So that's how they're related.
Just to add, so Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah said, to love necessitates you submit.
Yes.
But would you say to submit you have to love the individual? For example, you'll submit to a dictator, but you don't love him, but it's out of fear.
Yeah, of course, for sure. Yeah,
So-
we mentioned that. So there's two different types of submission, right? You have a submission due to surrendering to the power, the authority, or to their strength, and they're worthy of that submission by virtue who they are, or you surrender because you're forced.
So love necessitates submission, but submission doesn't have to be love. So that's a
It
link
depends
you
what
can say.
type of submission we're talking about. But if you, for example, submit and surrender to a power and authority, because they deserve that submission, that can turn into love. Remember, we're not saying it necessitates per se in philosophical language. We're saying there is a link. Is there a link between love and surrendering, love and submission and love? And I think there is, because if we say that love is relational, right? It's intentional and directional. I want you to be best version of yourself. I want you to have goodness and guidance. I want you I want to benefit you without you really seeking anything in return. I want to receive your love. I want the beloved to be happy. I want the beloved to take priority. And a lot of those things actually necessitate a sense of humility and submission. Yeah? Even if I'm just submitting to the idea, submitting to the power of that love, or I'm surrendering my ego for the higher goal or the higher virtues or the higher feelings, if you like, because I love you, isn't it? I'm not going to let my ego get in the way, right? I might do it for the first 5 minutes, but I'm going to realize, no, I love this person. Do you see my point? You know, I love my children, right? I hope I do anyway, of course. And I want them to be optimal versions of themselves. And I realize what I say is hardly anything. It's what I do that counts. Children listen with their eyes. And I remember once, me and my wife having a fiqh discussion. And I made a decision. And she was like, nice about it. I think you're wrong. And I was like, no, this is it. I go upstairs, I do a bit of homework. I go back and I'm like, oh my God, I was totally wrong. And this is in front of all the children. So my ego was like, I'm not going down and apologizing. No way. I'm not reversing. But I see there's that battle, there's that friction going on. But hopefully because I love my children and because I want good for them, right? I want to benefit them without receiving anything in return. I'm committed to the goodness and guidance, which is all aspects of love that we discussed. I went down and I made a public house announcement saying, Mum was right actually. Alhamdulillah. You guys follow what Mum just said because Allah is the king here. Yeah, Allah is first, and what the Prophet says, and what Mum said was accurate, and I was wrong. Jazakallah khair. That is a big lesson for them, right? But my ego was there, but because that love I have for them, commit to their well-being, want goodness and guidance for them, want to benefit them without receiving anything in return, I surrendered my ego because I love them. That's a perfect example here. Do you see? So love and submission are interrelated from that perspective. So, finally, what kind of love and submission must we have for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? So we've discussed the key aspects of love. So one aspect we said is the lover relates to the beloved in a way that intends good for them. Is that how we should love Allah? Does Allah require any good or?
Doesn't apply.
Because Allah is perfect, right? In Islamic, and we're going to discuss this hopefully next week, we believe in maximal perfect theology, meaning that Allah's names and attributes are to the highest degree possible with no deficiency, no flaw, and they're maximally perfect, okay? So you can't intend good for Allah. Okay, what about the other one? You want them to be optimal versions of themselves. No, of course not, because Allah is perfect. He is As-Samad, He is the absolutely independent. He is Al-Ghani, He is As-Salam. As-Salam doesn't just mean the source of peace. It means the one free of all imperfections as well. Right? Okay. You want to give without benefiting or seeking benefit. Does that apply? Yeah, it does. I want to give to Allah, like in terms of giving myself, giving my salah, giving my energy, my life, my death is owned by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We're making this exchange, right?
But you want reward.
But you don't have to. You don't have to.
You want Jannah.
You don't have to either. You could do it just because you love Allah.
Yeah.
No,
You can.
It can. Remember we were talking about the believer, disbeliever, empathy without empathy thing. So there's a category of people that might only do worship for the benefit of it. So they may do it because they want Jannah, they want the reward, they want to be safe from the fire, etc. But there may also be a category of people that love Allah so much, they do it because they simply see Him as worthy.
Yeah, we discussed this last week.
Why?
You missed because of ikhlas. We
I
defined
listened to the whole...
Oh, you did? Okay, good.
Yeah.
So ikhlas is basically that you're doing it because you want the divine reward, or you're doing it because you want to prevent yourself from being punished, or you're doing it because you love Allah. Now the ulama say you should do it for all of these reasons, but there are going to be some people who emphasize one over the other. Like for example, even in the tradition, you have very famous scholars, very famous, people of zuhud, of asceticism. They basically were really focused on divine love, like Rabia, sorry. She was basically, I don't care if I get punished, or I don't care if I'm getting a reward. I just want to love you, and I'm doing it for your love and to receive that love, right? But that also, because one would argue as well, that reward could be a sign of divine love, right? But generally speaking, it's not blameworthy to say, like, if someone has a focus on doing it because Allah is worthy of it, in this context, Allah it deserves to be loved, that's not blameworthy.
But you can't apply it to the masses.
Oh, of course.
So that's it's a
good,
problematic.
That's a very wise, wallahi, very spiritually insightful point, bro. Because sometimes we get over kind of romantic and mystical about these things, and when we go out to the world, we give them such a high bar that they can never achieve. And Imam Shafi's famous poem. I don't know if you know his famous poem about obedience. You claim to love Allah, but you disobey Him. Yeah, and because I was putting it as part of the book, and then I realized I need to do a context here, because that's setting the bar too high. Because we're in the age of righteous sinners, aren't we? There's no great mystics anymore, in my view. Just by virtue of the ideological frame that we live in, secularism, liberalism, naturalism, whatever, materialism, we're righteous sinners. So that's a very powerful point, bro. But in saying that, even if you do it for reward and punishment, there's going to be an aspect that you do it for love as well.
But without the punishment, like if Jahannam wasn't there, like I don't know, I'll really struggle to do salah.
Habibi, I get that, but Habibi, you do love Allah.
I do.
And there are sometimes there are actions that you've done because you love Allah as well.
Of course.
Good. Khalas. Now that's the point. So don't make them as separate categories, because there's always going to be those three aspects in there. But the thing is, if can you give your actions without benefiting directly, in terms of without having just the focus on reward? Yes, it could be because you love Allah. It could be.
But this still for a purpose. You love Allah. For example, you want Jannah, that's a purpose.
Yeah, no, for sure. No, we're not saying it's purposeless. We're saying, in the aspects of we're saying loving Allah, one aspect of love we said is benefiting without seeking benefit, or giving without receiving. Yeah. So could it be that some of your actions in the world could be that you give something, whether it's a supererogatory action like the nawafil or whatever the case may be, and could that be solely because you love Allah, without wanting anything in return? Could it be?
So why do you love Allah?
Because of who He is.
Because of who He is, but you know who He is, and then you know what will be the reward for that. For example, you love Allah.
Agreed, of course. No. We're not saying the reward is not going to be any part of it. But can it be the case that you're doing deeds, one deed, maybe not the fara'id, maybe not waking up for fajr or whatever the case may be, but there could be a deed, something, because there was an intentional moment in your heart that you did it because you weren't seeking the reward. It just came to you because I love Allah. Could it be the case?
Yeah, no, it can. But that's for a reward.
It could be even just recognition of His wisdom.
Yeah.
Bro, you anyway, we'll
talk. Reward, and then you do sajda.
No, but he's not doing the sajda shukr for reward.
I'm not doing it for reward. I'm just
like how great Allah is.
I'm
how
grateful for Him. I'm not doing it for
majesty,
for anything in return.
Let's not overcomplicate this. You're right. In the majority of the cases, it's a combination of fearing the consequences of our disobedience. It's also wanting Allah's reward, and it's because we love Allah, because Allah is worthy of the action. But could there be times when you're doing it because you believe Allah is just worthy of praise and glorification, because that's how you manifest your love for Allah. Remember what we said last week about the maqasid, the objectives of ibadah, that Shaykh Haytham was talking about when he was reflecting upon chapter 2 verse 30. You remember what the angel said?
Praise.
Nusabbihu, right? Glorify. Bihamdika, your praises. وَنُقَدِّسُ, we sanctify. So Shaykh Haytham argues that these are the objectives of ibadah. And he says if you frame it that way, your ibadah becomes very easy. You can increase the quality and the quantity. Like for example, doing the athkar in the morning, the evening, subhanallah wa bihamdihi. We know the reward. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam told us the reward of these actions, right? But there are some times where you're doing dhikr because you know Allah is worthy of praise.
Like you see something.
Like in the dunya, bro.
You see something.
Like Khabib, when he tapped out McGregor tapped. Yeah? What did we do? I remember where I was. Everyone remembers where they were on that day, yeah? I was on a plane just about to go to Paris with my daughter because we had some dawah thing and it was a day trip. And I was watching on the phone. And I was like, wow, right? You express yourself. So I was responding with praise due to an event that didn't really directly benefit me in any way. Yeah? We do this all the time. We give due praise to things even though they don't directly benefit us in their way by virtue of certain attributes that they have. And from this perspective, praise and glorification and sanctification are like expressions of love as well, which we'll unpack in the next couple of weeks. But the point here is, it could be the case.
It's like action of malaika. They don't have any reward, but they praise Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because they don't have any Jannah, punishment, but still they praise Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala because who He is. Because He deserves it.
Yeah, and remember, the ulama say we could get elevated beyond the angels. Yeah, because of who we are. So what's interesting here is, I'm not saying that all the actions that you do just because you love Allah, but there are some actions that we do because we sanctify Allah, we glorify Allah, we praise Allah. Essentially that love of Allah is there. Yeah, I would even admit with myself, not that I'm saying I'm this kind of mystical spiritual guy, but even you guys do it all the time. When you say you go to North Wales and you see the stars, subhanallah, right? I did not say that with intent for reward. I'm saying it by virtue of the fact because I love Allah, because I've seen a manifestation of His names and attributes.
The same was.
I don't agree with this.
Why?
Because the reason why you don't seek reward at that point is subconsciously Allah has already created the reward system that you're aware about. So when you say subhanallah, you don't need any of that.
What reward do you get when you praise the sportsman?
I don't worship the sportsman.
You're missing the point. Yeah, praise is a building block.
No, I say he's a good runner. He's a good.
Yeah, but listen, akhi, we have people, they get ecstatic, they praise thinkers, they praise sports people, they praise poets all the time, right? And there's no direct benefit to us. It could be, but in many cases it's not. They don't sustain us, or they don't, shape us.
When you praise Allah to the stars, it doesn't make you feel happy, and that sort of, it gives you happiness.
Yeah, but that happiness is that's not what I'm seeking.
It's secondary.
That's secondary. The point is, can there be an action that you do for Allah that is not necessarily just based on reward or punishment, that is based on the fact that it is an expression of the fact that I love Allah, or I'm glorifying Allah. Yes.
In that moment, yes.
Yeah, that's my point.
However, there is a subconscious element to it that you're aware. Imagine this, yeah? Imagine this. There's two people. They live completely different lives. One of them loves Allah and prays without any reward. And the other one does all the bad things that, Islam accepts as bad. Okay, everything that you can imagine. When they die, they go next to Allah, and Allah gives them the same exact treatment. No reward, nothing. Their ending is exactly the same. They don't achieve anything else. Why is it that that person gave up all his life to praise Allah and to do salah and do all of that without any reward? When that happens, when you go out there and when you say subhanallah, you ain't getting a reward. Even the way you say subhanallah will change, because you know that Lord does not appreciate you. That Lord doesn't accept that subhanallah is a good thing from you, because even if you don't say it, you're going to get the same treatment anyway.
I think what he means basically is like the reward is always there, but
Yeah.
you're saying intentionally that okay, I don't care about the reward. I'm just doing it for the sake
No,
of Allah.
I'm
subhanahu
not
wa
saying
ta'ala.
that. I'm saying could
Or
there
is
be
it-
cases where you're doing an action that not necessarily to receive any kind of direct benefit. So sometimes the way we praise Allah, by virtue of who Allah is, when we do that many times, we don't necessarily do that because we know at that moment we're going to get some kind of reward. We're just reflecting the reality of who Allah is. Yeah. And that happens in many cases. Whether you want to go to a kind of psychodynamic subconscious level, that's a different issue, right? But the issue here is, could there be a case where you do some deeds or you do some form of giving without receiving, meaning that you give a statement or a praise or you do a certain act of worship, and that act of worship is predominantly focused on the fact that you love Allah rather than that you're going to get any reward. And I would argue that even if you explore your own life, that can be the case and has been the case. Now, if we have to go and refer to things like subconscious levels, that's like neither here or there. Yeah. The point is, it can be the case that you do something because you love Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
So you do it, but you still get rewarded for it. Your intention was not to get the reward because you did it purely like out of love or whatever.
Yeah, for sure. No,
So
I'm not saying the reward is not there.
I think that's what he meant. The
No,
reward
no,
is
no,
always
no,
there.
we're not saying that. That's a
what
different
I
discussion.
think both of you are correct.
Yeah.
It's just
You're acknowledging that the reward is there. So the fact that you do, imagine you praise
of
a
course,
Lord
but-
that doesn't appreciate your
Yeah,
praise.
but that's a different issue. We're not talking about that. We're talking about how can we now, when we talked about the essential elements or some aspects of love, how can we relate to Allah in that way? So what we said was, one aspect of love is that you give without receiving. Yeah, can that be the case with the human being? Yes. We could do it without expecting anything to be receiving anything, because doing it just for the love in that moment. Are we going to get reward? Of course. You know, Allah is the appreciative and so on and so forth. We're not denying that, yeah? So the next point was, we want to receive the love of the beloved. Remember, that was another aspect of love. So the way we relate to Allah is that we want to receive Allah's love. And we see this in Surah Al-Imran. What does Allah say? He says to the Prophet ﷺ, say, if you love Allah, thank you, follow me, the Prophet ﷺ, and Allah will love you and forgive your sins. So is it the case that you want to receive the love of the beloved? Yes. So that's how we relate to Allah. And in this case, you have to follow the Prophet ﷺ. And the other aspect of love was, we want the beloved to be pleased or happy. Correct?
Yeah.
We want Allah to be happy, pleased, right? We want Allah to be pleased with us, correct? Which has rewardable aspects in there, but focus on what we meant by love. So this is how we relate to Allah with regards to love. And the other one is, the beloved takes priority. If there's a clash between the love of your brother and the love of Allah, what takes priority? Because our allegiance is with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Do you see the point now? So we mentioned all of these aspects of love. Some cannot apply to Allah by virtue of who Allah is, because He is perfect. He doesn't require completion. He doesn't. You can't say we want Allah to be optimal. That's the shirk, kufr, and everything else in between. Yeah, because Allah is the maximal perfect being. But the other aspects of love that we discussed, giving without actually necessarily receiving, want to receive the love of the beloved, want the beloved to be pleased or happy, and the beloved takes priority. All those aspects of love is in line in the way how we could love Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Is that clear? Okay, yes. Question, then we're going to finish in 2 minutes.
I have a question. This is an ayah that keeps on coming to my mind in the Quran that kind of has a relation between submission and love. And it doesn't directly mention these things, but it just keeps on coming to my mind. And it's the first ayah in Surah Isra. Subhanalladhi asra bi abdihi. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent His abd, someone who is obedient, someone who made, full taslim. He surrendered himself, referring to the Prophet ﷺ. And the same ayah is referring back to how the Prophet was elevated to the highest any creation has ever been in proximity to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So there has to be some sort of correlation. I'm trying to think of it when it comes to being an abd and you're closest.
Yeah, but
in
that's
love with
Allah raising someone's maqam
Yeah.
as a result of the submission.
Yes.
This is different concerning the idea of love and
Yes.
submission and how they can relate to each other.
Okay.
Slightly subtle
Okay.
difference.
Okay. That
But
makes
look, I
sense.
think we've got it clear.
Yeah.
It's although sidetracking because of misunderstanding, but it's good to have that discussion. The aspects of love that we mentioned, some of them we cannot refer to Allah that way by virtue of Allah's perfection and completion and total independence. But the other aspects, such as we can give without wanting anything in return, like giving our deeds or praise or whatever the case may be. We want to receive the love of the beloved. We want the beloved to be pleased or happy. The beloved takes priority. These 4 aspects of love can relate to how we love Allah. Clear? Now, final point now. Submission. We discussed what love is, we discussed what submission is and how they can relate. We discussed how we can relate to Allah with regards to a loving relationship, and we spoke about the 4 key aspects now out of the rest of them which can't apply. Now what about submission? How do we now submit to Allah? I'm looking for one key word.
Eager.
Obedience.
Obedience. What type of obedience? Willing, but you know, we could obey and submit to many things.
Submit our will to the will of Allah.
It's complete. So unconditional obedience. Obviously, this doesn't mean we're all going to obey all the time. No. And you know, even some of the Bedouins were reluctant. You know, the famous hadith where the Bedouin said that, you know, I'll become a Muslim if I'm allowed to pray twice a day or something. Yeah? And there's a discussion amongst the ulama what that really means. But it's an important thing to note, because some people think, oh my God, I always have to unconditionally obey in order for me to be a good Muslim. No, we're not saying that. But the idea of submission, when we're thinking about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it's not only complete, it's unconditional. Why? Now we don't have to go too much depth, because we're going to spend one key session on obeying Allah as a form of worship and why Allah is worthy of worship. But what we're looking for here, what is it about Allah the reason why we are submitting to Him? Because remember how we defined yeah, He does. But remember we said submission is yield to an authority, to surrender to power, strength, or the superiority of another thing or being.
Because we love Him.
So what is it about Allah that we're surrendering
all
to?
of these
Thank you.
attributes.
Allah is the powerful. Nothing comes close to His power. Right? Allah is the supreme. Allah is the majestic. Allah is the king of all kings. So if one aspect of submission and obedience is that we surrender, obey a power, strength, or the superiority of another being, then by virtue of that, or by greater reason, a fortiori argument, we're going to submit to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala because He is the majestic, He is the all-powerful, He is the wise, He is the knowing, He's Al-Alim, Al-Hakim. Do you see my point? Because He is the ultimate authority essentially. Yes?
If there's anything else that you love, He is the cause of that as well. So if you love your mother, Allah is the one who gave you your mother.
Yeah, we've moved on from love, but you're right. And we're going to mention that when we talk about the 7 reasons why Allah is worthy of love. 5 of those reasons is from Al-Ghazali's work. But that's true. I always say that. I said, how could you not love the source of love? And love that which allows love to occur in the first place. Yeah. And I say, if you don't love Allah, it's probably the greatest form of hatred, which we're going to unpack in the next couple of weeks. Okay, so look, I didn't realize this would take much longer than it should have. But alhamdulillah, it was a good discussion because love is always going to bring out these things. So we were supposed to cover taxonomy of fear and why Allah is and why everyone worships. Because we could universalize the concept of love that we discussed in the first session, which is to love something the most, to obey or refer to something the most, and to direct acts of devotion to something the most. We're going to use that as a dawah tool now, next on Monday, and do tadabbur of Quran chapter 39 verse 29 in order to use this even with atheists, with people even who reject Allah, just by focusing on worship. It's a very powerful argument. Sometimes I give it without even talking about God's existence. I said this last week or a few days ago when I was asked once, I think at Leicester University, give a talk on God's existence. I rejected. I said, let me talk about why Allah is worthy of worship. And it was existentially powerful for the atheists because they realized, if this is true, I'm worshipping something, and those things that I'm worshipping are not worthy of it. But what Hamza has just introduced to us, or who Hamza has introduced us to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that sounds like it's a being worthy of worship. And that could awaken the fitrah. Yeah, it's very powerful. It's a very, very powerful exercise because every human being at any point in time is going. It may be it may change, but there's going to be something on top that they love the most. It may fluctuate, but there's something on top. There's always something in their life they're going to obey or refer to something the most. There's always going to be something that they direct acts of devotion like praise and gratitude towards something the most. Whether you're an atheist or whoever you are, it could be yourself because you're a narcissist. It could be an ideology or whatever the case may be. But on Monday, we're going to unpack in detail how we could apply this in a Dawah context. And it's so powerful because you transcend any philosophy and intellectualism, you go straight to the fitrah and you awaken it. Yeah, it's one of the most powerful ways of dealing with someone because you don't have to intellectually hold any ground. You're like, yeah, maybe, it's an interesting point. Yeah, that's an interesting philosophical hair. We could split another day when we have pizza tomorrow, no problem. But in this particular issue, who do you love? What are you referring to the most, or what you're praising, what you're thinking, and then you get them to understand that okay, well that thing or those things are actually your objects of worship. Let me introduce you to a deity that is actually worthy of all of these. And just by virtue of that introduction, without even thinking you have to believe in him, this and the other, can be a great means to awaken the fitrah. And this epistemologically is in line with our tradition. Because if look at the works on the fitrah with regards to Ibn Taymiyyah and even Al-Ghazali and others, you would see that rational arguments are just a means, not an end. They're like an instrument to awaken the fitrah. They're not necessary, depending on the person you're talking to. That's why in the Sunnah you see some psychological, spiritual arguments. Like even Al-Ghazali spoke about this. You're not going to do kalam to someone who is more psychologically orientated. It would be blameworthy for you to do that. And you're not going to give kalam to someone who doesn't need it, because you may even confuse them even more, right? So the point is, the sunnah of giving dawah to individuals is to individualize them, which requires listening with the intention to understand. Listening with the intention to understand and being committed to their well-being, because you have to be committed to their guidance and goodness, right? Which what rahmah really means, yeah? So therefore, in that context, you'd assess, does that person really need an abstract argument on like cosmology? It might be the case, or you may have to do a combination, yeah? The point is, if we understand our epistemic backdrop, right, or anthropological backdrop, if you like, what is the human, you will see that we have a fitrah, and that fitrah already has an affinity for the divine. I mentioned this 3 days ago in the previous session. The fitrah is like a vehicle that's driving towards destination haqq. But the windscreen could be misty or clouded, so it deviates. So our job is to demystify the windscreen or uncloud the windscreen so the vehicle of the fitrah could reach destination haqq. Now that demystification process, that unclouding process, may not be a rational argument. It might be just showing them who Allah is. Wallah. And the times that we deal with shubuhat, destructive doubts with Lighthouse, the amount of times I've referred them to Allah's names and attributes and who Allah is unbelievable. Even when they came with an intellectual argument, because that was just a veil that was covering that subconscious element, bro, yeah, or that internal element. You'd be so surprised.
A lot of my best conversations have been on that subject,
yeah,
on why Allah is worthy of worship, and I think some of the biggest turnarounds have been like some eureka moments.
Absolutely.
When they've really clocked onto what that means.
And Habibi, this is not to dismiss the rational stuff, because we're Sapience Institute, this is what we do. But it's to just reframe it sometimes, because sometimes when we focus on the rational, we forget the existential, spiritual. So my recommendation is when we start giving talks about God's existence, always end it last 10 minutes, how that argument links to why Allah is worthy of worship. Like the contingency argument, which shows that everything is utterly dependent on Allah. Okay, what does that show and how we should relate to Allah now? See, and explore that. Or the Quranic argument for God's existence, when you show that there is an uncreated creator. Okay, He is Al-Khaliq, He is the creator, He created every conscious moment of our existence. He's given us something priceless that we don't earn or own, nor do we deserve, but it's freely given to us. How should we respond to Allah? With gratitude, ultimate gratitude, right? And so on and so forth, which we'll unpack in the next couple of sessions. But I'm really excited, because on Monday's one, we'll do some what do you call it? Debates or interactions, and we could use this as a good conversational piece. But yeah, Jazakallah khair. I know this one was a little bit more, trying to understand very crazy concepts, but I think we got there at the end, and I'm really excited for the next one, which is going through the taxonomy of divine fear, different types of fear. We'll go through things like taqwa and khawf and khashiyah and so on and so forth. And then after, what we'll do, we'll talk about how everyone worships, do tadabbur of Quran 39:29, and then we'll do some interaction, and then the next session after that, inshallah. Jazakallah, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.